You're listening to the Joyous Podcast with Mike Carden, where we talk to the world's most interesting business thinkers about life and work and life. Today's guest is Alex Badenoch. For show notes and other content referenced in this podcast, visit joyoushq.com/podcast. And now, here's Mike.
Hello and welcome to the Joyous Podcast. I'm Mike Carden, co-founder of Joyous. My guest today is Alex Badenoch. So Alex was most recently the Group Executive Transformation, Communication and People for Telstra, led the company's transformation strategy on behalf of the CEO and the board. Subsequently, Alex is a senior advisor at McKinsey and at Joyous. So I've been lucky enough to have had many chats with Alex now on enterprise transformation, and every conversation seems to have a new aha moment, as the kids say. So welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks, Mike. Lovely to be here.
Hey, now I'm sure you know I like to start these podcasts with the origin story, as they say in the superhero movies. So tell us, go right back. Where does the Alex Badenoch story begin?
Yeah, no superheroes in it, but I actually had a bit of a different upbringing, which no doubt has sort of led or impacted where I've ended up. I spent my life moving around. I was actually born in Germany and then moved every 2 or 3 years across a really broad set of countries, everywhere from Yugoslavia to India to Korea to France to Germany. And I think it gave me, it was a wonderful upbringing. It gave me amazing exposure to different cultures, to the richness of human beings and everything that goes with that. And also, I think, probably made me pretty adaptable to working in really different environments, which has come in handy over the years. But all of that, for whatever reason, made me quite fascinated with the human condition, societies, communities, how they operate. And I think from fairly early on, I knew I wanted to work in some sort of capacity around people, culture. I think originally it was probably more down sort of social work kind of path, but always actually had a passion or an interest in studying psychology, which is what I did with every intention of being a practicing psychologist, which never happened. I got a little distracted. I took a part-time job and sort of ended up doing sort of the hiring and a bit of the staff management and bits and pieces. I thought this is actually quite interesting. And it was a really practical way of applying some of the thoughts and theory that I'd learned. And I just kept going and have carved a career, which is probably a little bit reminiscent of the childhood, because while human beings and human behaviour has always been a core part of what I do, it's been industry agnostic across everything from retail to chartered accounting to heavy supply chain logistics, telecommunications. So I continue clearly to seek out the variety of experience, Mike, in my life, just the way it started.
Going back, just that bit of moving around a lot as a kid, you mentioned culture. Do children even notice different cultures?
Yeah, I think you do. You don't know what it is, but you notice different. You certainly notice different sort of environments that you're in, and that it feels different. And I had very strong, both positive and negative reactions to different environments. Some were easier to adapt to. Some were warmer and more welcoming. Some were more rigid. Some were more threatening. And I think you actually become very attuned to it, but what it does is it wires you to adjust and adapt. So it sort of creates this inbuilt agility to pick up cues very quickly and to adapt your style, your approach, what you're doing to that environment. I actually think children are probably far more culturally attuned in many ways than adults.
I think someone once said this to me, that their definition of culture, and I'm sure there's not a broad definition of culture, but their definition of culture was that you have a thought in your head and then you translate that into speech or action or something. You manifest it into the world, and you do that through your cultural filter. And then the person at the other side sees your action or your speech or whatever, and they take that and they process it through their cultural filter and turn it into a thought in their head. And so if you have the same culture, your thought and their thought will end up being approximately the same. But if you have very different cultures, you can end up with very, very different thoughts.
Yeah, I think that there's probably some logic to that. There's no doubt our cultural experiences wire our brain to see things, perceive things, experience them in particular ways. And there are things that will feel a cultural fit, so they'll feel comfortable. And there are things that will not align to the cultural norms that we were taught. And sometimes you don't even know why you're reacting. Someone will be saying something or doing something. You can feel it. It can be quite a strong, almost physical reaction, and you won't have a logical expression as to why you're reacting. But I think it'll often be the cultural rub of something that doesn't quite fit with, in your words just before, with the way your filter was formed.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think we used to think of cultures as really existing between different countries or different ethnicities, but gosh, I think there's really quite different cultures within. You live in Australia, just within Australian society, that are not always based on those kind of maybe ethnic lines, based on all sorts of things around your bubble and what you grow up with.
Without a doubt, I think sometimes we assume way too much that certain communities are quite homogeneous when they're not. Yeah. That there are different defining factors, and we often make an assumption just based on what we see. Right, so you see me, I'm a woman, I'm clearly Anglo-Saxon, I speak English reasonably well on a good day, and so you will probably decide that I was born and raised in an English-speaking country. You would have made probably a whole bunch of assumptions about who I am, many of which actually will be wrong.
So are you German speaking originally, or?
Well, my parents were Australian, so I've always spoken English, but my first language for reading and writing was French, and I had to learn to read and write English later. So one of the huge godsends for me was the creation of the spell check, because it has certainly improved my written capability over the years.
What did your parents do, just by the way, that you kind of just kept moving around?
Yeah, so my father was a trade commissioner, and so it just meant different postings, usually about every 2 to 3 years, and eventually he got a posting to Australia. That's how I got back here.
Does that mean you get to go through that quick queue in customs, the diplomatic queue, right? Always covered
there were
in
upsides.
So.
There were upsides, Mike. Yeah, a few downsides. Yeah.
Hey, so you kind of studied psychology. You ended up in lots of industries, including some of those big heavy workforce kind of industries. How did you land at Telstra? Talk us through that, because that sort of seems to be the part of your career you're most well known for.
Yeah. Look, I'd love to tell you it was some brilliant plan that I manoeuvred to, but I was actually because I've done 2 rounds of service with Telstra, and the first time I joined, I was actually working for Novell at the time, an IT company based out of the US, looking after Asia Pacific, and I have to say I was not finding it the most exciting experience that I'd ever taken on. And someone I knew just rang me and said, do you know anyone who might be good? I'm looking for someone to fill, which was at the time the head of HR for all the consumer parts of Telstra. I said, well, actually, that sounds like a really good job. I'll take that on. And so I did. And it was, I think, to be honest, at the time, what I knew is that it was big. It had the complexity of large-scale workforce. It had transition challenges from going from government-owned to to a private enterprise. And so all of that was attractive, but I was not, having not grown up in Australia, I wasn't sort of deeply connected to Telstra. I didn't feel any strong opinions one way or the other. So it was more those dimensions that had me join it. And then having got into it, it's an amazing company. It is genuinely, and I've worked across a lot of business, genuinely one of the most interesting, challenging and complex organisations to work on. So if you're highly sort of stimulated by complexity and challenge, but opportunity to impact, because that's the flip side with Telstra is, yes, it's hard, it's big, it's complex, but there's a genuine curiosity and willingness to learn and to shift and to move. So it's somewhere that you can really have impact at scale. And I don't think those opportunities come around every day. And in my first stint, I worked across two CEOs. I worked Sol Trujillo, who was very famous or infamous for his tenure and leading Telstra, but also with David Thodey in that first round. So extraordinarily sort of high change periods, going from probably slightly sleepy government to much more commercial, sort of harder performance edge, really trying to get after with David then the customer experience side. So there was some fabulous change periods within the organisation, but my second stint, I have to say, was by far the most exciting. And I think what it was, again, if you sort of step back and think, at that point in time, I rejoined Telstra as the company had renationalised the fixed line network, had taken about a third of the company's revenue out of the business. We had cranky shareholders. We had pretty cranky customers, and not particularly happy employees. So we were winning on all fronts. It was the trifecta of challenges, and we needed to truly innovate and make a substantial business change to the business. And I think that is a moment in time that's just an absolute gift in terms of leadership if you jump in and take it on. And I think that's why I went back. That's why I had an amazing opportunity as a leader to have impact over that 6 to 7 year period.
Yeah, I remember you saying, when we caught up a while ago, that piece where you remove that third of the revenue, the kind of fixed line infrastructure kind of business, it's like removing a Qantas worth of revenue.
Yeah, it is, and I don't think many people sort of had quite sort of digested the size and scale of it. And when you think of it, I find it useful to think in those terms, because it then makes you realise, the ability to just organically grow that amount of revenue overnight is pretty tricky.
Oh yeah, of course, right.
Equally, it's not something you can necessarily go and acquire very easily. So it means you've got to adjust your cost base by about 30%. And you have to also rethink what you are in the market, because actually your product base has changed, your relationship to your customer has changed. You can't get more dramatic than that in a way. Yeah.
When I worked for HP in the early 2000s, for Hewlett Packard, we were the computing behemoth at the time, and the market expectation was we would grow 10% a year. 10% a year was the size of Microsoft. So the actual level of invention that actually had to underpin that growth is something that people can't really. It's very hard to understand how much you actually have to outperform to do that.
That's extraordinary. That's even scarier than going and acquiring a Qantas, really, isn't it?
Hey, so just talk me through that kind of transition from, it's kind of an OD, HR, people and culture kind of background through to transformation. You're now running this transformation. How does that first part of your career kind of equip you for the transformation role?
Yeah. Look, I think I've always been slightly a collector of work or activities or projects that sat slightly outside of my realm. And I've been lucky enough to be parts of businesses in different periods of change. But, potentially I think, a good sort of reference point is the job I went to between my Telstra stints. So I went to a company called Asiano. And it's not a company most people know because it's a B2B company. It's not a consumer business, but it ran things like 50% of the ports in Australia. It ran with a significant line share of the Crossland railroad that transported sort of really everything from coal to trucks and cars and all that sort of thing. It was a pretty tough industry, and as many in Australia would know, it was probably known for having a really militant and somewhat sort of aggressive industrial environment. The unions are not particularly friendly, and there's other elements that sort of sit alongside the waterfront, which are challenging. That business had been spun out of another business at a very sort of high multiple. People had bought in at a very high share price, which had crashed pretty quickly. So again, you had disgruntled shareholders. You had a workforce that didn't have much trust or love for its employers, and in some cases with reasonable reason. I think environments, you participate in them as leaders. They don't come from nowhere, and so low trust, low engagement from an employee perspective, and solid performance, but not really shooting the lights out. So again, it was sort of that sort of threefold opportunity to have an impact. And I got the chance to work with a great CEO who ended up being the chairman of Telstra, actually, John Mullins. So, the first thing is my transition was deeply helped by working with amazing leaders, because I think you learn a lot. Someone like John is super humble but amazingly smart. His ability to work through what are actually the big opportunities, what are going to be the things that make the difference, but do it in a way that he builds amazing stakeholder relationships at all levels. I do think I had got the opportunity to learn from him, but I equally got the opportunity to be in a really tough environment that tried pretty hard to reject me, tried pretty hard to reject the change we were trying to drive. So I think I built the resilience. I think I built a capability to understand what the levers of change were in an organisation, and so much of change is driven by organisational structure, operating model, leadership style, capability, which drives culture, and the relationship you have with your workforce. I know, many transformations are built around digitisation or built around taking big costs out, those sorts of things. I think the heart of transformation is organisation, people and culture. And when you get those components right, then the byproducts are often that you can then improve performance, or that you by default almost start to release costs out of the business because you take unnecessary work out of the business, or you're willing to streamline how you do work. So in that job, I had sort of started to spread my wings and took on communications, took on actually a small sort of customer or business development kind of function, where I was responsible for looking at the company-wide customer experience, how we might be able to bring together different components of the business. So I think we're very non-HR-y. So I started doing that there, but then went back to pure HR when I went back to Telstra. But again, I think I was lucky enough to work with a leader who had an appetite for and a belief in the need for change, and aligned very strongly that the heart of the change was going to be the organisation, its people, its culture, its leadership, and therefore it felt very logical to both CEO and the board that I'd be the right person to take the cross-company leadership.
Yeah, you just sit at that nexus, right? That intersection. So just to summarise that, the TLDR version of it. When I say transformation, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. To me, transformation is something that is large-scale, profound change. It's not sort of little incremental components. It's something that is fundamentally disruptive of either the way a company works, what it does, its cost base, its customer base. It has to be something very substantial, and for me, usually over a very defined period of time. So you have a reasonably clear view of where you're going, over what time frame, and that there's a magnitude, substantial magnitude of change involved.
Mm. So talk us through then the Telstra transformation and particularly what made it a success, because it's it's vaunted as a success within Australian business, right? So talk us through that.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, necessity is a wonderful thing. We, as I said before, we did have that we had the pre-built burning platform, which was useful, but that of itself doesn't necessarily guarantee change. I think, the Telstra transformation, first of all, I think it did something a little different to me that I've seen, in that it was very much a holistic transformation. It wasn't a customer transformation or a digital transformation or a cost transformation. It was all of the above, because it became very clear to myself, to others, that the only way we were going to do what we needed to do was to tackle all of the challenges at once. And that was a big debate. People said, but couldn't we do it sequentially and reduce the risk? But the problem was that you actually had a defined time frame for change, but also by doing things together, you actually really create significant disruption to unlock the opportunity for change. We did talk about actually the fact that we needed to discombobulate the organisation so that it didn't have that ability to anchor back down and keep doing what it's always done. Because we started off talking about culture. Companies have really strong cultures, and they're super good at actually hanging on to those and resisting change. So doing everything and doing it at pace and doing it with sizable ambition was important. So it spread across doing everything from looking at customer experience, our products, our services, how we offer those, the structure of our business, separation of our consumer business versus our infrastructure business, massive change to the way we worked, our operating model. We moved to what we talked about as at scale agile for about 20,000 employees, which was huge cultural change. And then, cost was definitely an output. It involved taking about $2.5 billion of cost out over the 4-year time frame, the transformation. So I think why it was successful to me, I think there are a couple of somewhat simple things, and they don't sound like much when you say them, Mike, but they kind of are. And the first was we actually wrote it down and got very clear on what our plan was. The T22 scorecard was 1 page, 4 pillars, 5 or 6 sort of key goals under each one, and 2 or 3 very clear measures of success for each of those pillars. It was very simple. We did not try and boil the ocean. We did not try and capture everything that could ever be done, but we wanted those beacons there that would hold us to account and give us sort of the clear sort of goalposts or the milestones as we travelled through that 4-year journey. But writing it down and publishing it to our shareholders, publishing it to our people, it's like making a personal promise as a senior executive, which I think is extraordinarily powerful because you hold yourself to account then, and you also have a way to hold everyone else to account along that journey. So I think the clarity of what we were going to do was really important, but also the discipline that came with that, the fact that we could measure it, monitor it, knew if we were on track, that we could communicate progress really clearly to the market or to our employees. And we only ever use one document. There weren't different packs produced. We only ever use that one pager pretty much all the way through. And T25, the next iteration of the strategy, has a one pager that looks very similar to it. So that was
hopefully it's not exactly the same things on it.
Not exactly. No. Different pillars, different goals, different measures. But the disciplines have carried through to the way that Telstra does business now, which is also, I think, part of the trick. Transformation wasn't something that sat over to the side. For the period of time, it was how we ran the business. It was our strategy. There wasn't the strategy and then transformation. Transformation was our strategy. And I think often it's kind of like a special project as opposed to actually being your business strategy.
Being completely central, right? It's an interesting thing. I've heard this a bunch actually from a lot of successful leaders recently. This I guess, what would you call it, tension between setting a strategy and making it simple. And then this thing which happens to humans, but particularly to leaders who are always involved in the next thing, of going, I thought of something new. I kind of want to now insert that into it rather than going, hey, actually, we've decided what we're doing for the next 2 or 3 years and we're just going to keep doing it.
Yeah. And the discipline of sticking the course, staying the course is so powerful. And you are spot on. And it happened a million times. I mean, there's always a new shiny thing, right? There's another thing that sounds fun or exciting or important. And it wasn't that you completely shut yourself off to possibility or to innovation, but you really challenged yourself. And there had to be a very good reason for changing something. So one of the things my team did is it governed that. It governed the change protocols. It had to pass a set of standards if you were going to move anything in the plan. We had, for example, a little curveball called COVID in the middle of it, right? We hadn't planned that.
You didn't plan COVID. That wasn't
no,
okay.
No, wasn't in the one pager. We sat back and said, okay, what does that mean? Does it mean anything needs to change about our plan? On the whole, it didn't. It meant some resequencing of certain things. And for example, one of the really challenging parts of a transformation like that is it did mean about 30% of our workforce left the company over the period of the transformation. And at the heart of that COVID period, one of the things we actually sat back and went, people are doing it really tough right now, and the level of uncertainty in our company, let alone in our communities, was so high that one of the things we decided to was pause the workforce reduction. And that has consequences, has cost consequences, has a delayed cost out impact, all of those things. But it was the right thing to do. Now, we had to go and say to people, we're going to pause that, but on this date, it's got to start again, because what we didn't want to do is pause it for so long that it would actually just make the hurdle even higher.
Yeah, of course.
At the back end of the plan. So I do think discipline, staying the course, in the almost slightly sort of zealous way, is extraordinarily powerful. And it, when you're taking a company through a lot of change, I'm sure you see this, Mike. Human beings, there's that first reaction when you're going through change. I always felt like the organisation's holding its breath and it's hoping you're going to go away or forget the plan or, get distracted by something else because they're not enjoying that first phase of change necessarily. And so I think consistency actually is really important to helping people come with you as well, because they can see the clarity of the plan. They can see that you're committed to it. They can see the regular rhythm. And so it actually creates a new certainty for them. And it's one of the things that really helps people through change. The clarity and certainty of what we're going to do next actually helps people start to deal with change and start to come on that path with you.
Hey, so, you and I co-hosted a lunch recently for transformation leaders in Melbourne. And before I go any further, I've got to do a shout out to the folk at Gimlet, because that was a great lunch. So if you're looking for a lunch venue in Melbourne, the folk at Gimlet really looked after us for about 4 hours of our lunch. But we got to spend some time with some great transformation leaders there. Was there any kind of common themes that you heard in those chats?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think transformation was on the tip of everyone's tongues, because I think, and it was, I mean, as you know, Mike, it was a very broad set of industries. It's not as if everyone was coming from the same place. People were at different points in their organisational life, but everyone was facing some sort of substantive challenge. And I think that's actually really common, across the board at the moment, whether it's sort of digitisation, the impact of AI, whether it's fundamental shifts in customer expectations or regulatory environments. There's something substantial that everyone was grappling with. So number one was, it was hard to find anyone who didn't believe they had a pretty significant transformation agenda either underway or looming. Two, I think people were struggling or looking to find the way to create the clarity around their transformation journey. So, it's one thing, because I think companies often start talking about transformation, but how can you make it specific, real, measurable, something that you can communicate? And my sense was they were still milling around in part how to do that. But also the other sort of really interesting conversation is how much is top-down versus how much is bottom-up. How much do you bring the employee voice into your transformation journey and planning and execution, and for a range of different reasons. I mean, one is partly about engagement, adoption and acceptance. If you involve people, they're more likely to do those things. But also, certainly for me, and I know for a number of others in the conversation, actually your people are often the best source of innovation, and they are often the best source of knowing where the roadblocks are or the barriers are to change. So it can just be awfully wise to involve them in the planning.
Yeah, it was interesting at that lunch. There was quite a few senior folk from healthcare, right? And obviously, transformation in healthcare, it's the background of healthcare at the moment is transformation, right? But it's interesting talking to some of those folk that at the top level of the organisation, lots of people were kind of moving around, and different roles were being created, and there was talk of all sorts of different things. And so to those leaders, there was tons of transformation happening right down through middle management. Whereas the field often, so in this case, nurses and non-clinical staff and so on, didn't really think there was a transformation going on at all. It's an interesting thing, that, to me.
Yeah, which, I mean, I often think if your broader workforce doesn't feel anything's changing, you've got to wonder whether you can tick the box of it being a transformation. You asked about definition of transformation before. I mean, I would have thought it should be felt, because if it's substantial enough, it should be felt. I think the reality is most transformations in their design and their initiation are top down. I think that's just the nature of the beast. But I think there's a point in your planning or a point in your process where actually starting to bring far more bottom-up input becomes critical, one, to succeed, but also to make sure that the whole organisation is truly part of that change. Because if I change the top 3 layers but nothing else underneath, have I actually changed anything about how the company's working? And as important as senior executives are, I still tend to think that the majority of what's going on in business is happening in the bottom 3 layers as opposed to the top 3 layers.
Yeah. So look, you're a Joyous advisor, right? And Joyous, of course, comes from a heritage of using employee feedback for continuous improvement. But how do you see Joyous being used in transformation?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's got a fabulous place to play. If I think about some of the work we did, one of the measures we used in our scorecard was looking at the health of the organisation, and specifically a question around how easy it was to get business done around here. For people who've worked in big companies, I'm sure that you have experienced a moment in time where it's pretty hard to get stuff done around the organisation because of bureaucracy, because of organisational layers, whatever the case may be. And one of the things we wanted to do in the way we changed the way the business worked was change that experience for employees. We wanted it to feel easier. We wanted it to feel lighter. And part of that is that's going to improve engagement and employee experience. But when things feel lighter and easier to get done, you're probably building greater agility and speed into your business and reducing cost. When things feel really hard, they're usually heavy and slow and costly. So we brought that in. So we did a measurement around it, and it sort of brought up a whole areas that we were doing well and areas that we weren't doing so well. But the only way to get under it for us at the time was pretty old-fashioned focus groups. Parts of my team trawling through all the stuff, pulling all the feedback together. We created sort of a top 10 list, and we published it, and we knocked that stuff off. And we hit our target in terms of improvement because we were listening to the pain points being experienced by the frontline. I think it was a really important thing to do. But I look at how we did it, and we did it in a very manual, very sort of people-heavy and time-consuming way, and hard to distill. And I think about the role a Joyous could have played in helping us with that is, it sits right at that heartland. At the moment in time, you want to bring your employee voice into transformation. It can help you do that really efficiently and effectively, Mike, is how I would think about it.
Hey, so we started talking about human culture, really, I guess, or culture could only really be human, I guess. And on the Joyous Advisory Board call the other day, Gary Hamill was talking about transformation and about how you've got to kind of get the coalition for change has got to be able to outmuscle the coalition for the status quo. And I'm just trying to get my head around this because a lot of people think that culture in a business, like your company culture, is kind of immutable. But in that transformation in Telstra, did you have to break the culture to an extent?
Yeah, I think we did. And I think that was the toughness of the beginning, Mike. And it is, that's why it is top down initially, because we had to disrupt it so severely that you can then start to rebuild. And it doesn't mean you get rid of everything because there are things in Telstra culture that I think are extraordinary. I mean, the loyalty is amazing. It is comprised of amazingly smart people. It has a true adoption of flexibility and working remotely that, to be honest, almost no company has got anything like it. So it's got lots of strengths. But there were things we did have to break, and we did that in a range of ways. I mean, right up front, even the executive team, 50% of the executive team changed on the day of the announcement. All but one person were in a different job than they were the day before. Within the first couple of weeks, about 20% of senior management left the organisation. We shrunk senior management fast and made very deliberate decisions about who stayed, people who we felt were going to help us sort of propagate this next stage. We worked pretty hard early on at building, I suppose, a coalition of the willing in helping us design some of the change. So you sort of built that initial sort of bow wave of energy around the change. But we rewired everything from how teams were structured, how the organisation was structured, how we did our planning, how we allocated funding. My experience of most organisations is behaviour does follow the money to some extent. So how we allocated funding, how we planned our priorities, those were really important symbols of culture. And we went from a more closed culture where not the things were hidden, actually. I think it was more that people didn't think it was that important for people to know, to a quarterly planning process where all our objectives were transparently communicated and tracked and exposed to our entire workforce every single quarter. So high levels of transparency. I think it sort of became it was shifting to be a far more sort of servant leadership type style, where the role of leader was to get rid of the obstacles rather than to run around managing what everyone did, because actually you hire really smart, good people and they can go and, once they're clear on what needs to be done, very good at going and doing it. So it was a massive disruption, massive.
I think that we'll close it there on that idea of the servant leader, because I think that is such a strong idea. This idea that you're there to remove roadblocks as a leader rather than to make all the decisions. Alex, it's been fascinating, really. What a ride too. Just for you and for the industry. Really, really interesting. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike.
This has been the Joyous Podcast, brought to you by Joyous. Human conversations and AI analytics in one. Find out more at joyoushq.com. If you liked this show, make sure to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to join us for our upcoming podcast with Nate Edwards, where he and Mike discuss how human connections drive success at work. This episode of the Joyous Podcast was hosted by Mike Carden and produced by Kai Crow, Karen Rayner, and Brandon Berman. Thanks for joining us. And remember, everyone deserves to be joyous.